Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is training, and the question is, how important is flexibility? So recently our last kind of training podcast was titled number 439, Limited Development Due to Limited Movement. And we talked about how movement limitations in terms of, like, say, joint flexibility or muscular tightness issues can negatively impact our development in terms of strength, aesthetics, kind of joint pain, freedom of motion and movements. So there's kind of like a lot of effect that joint muscular health can have on our overall development towards our goals. Now, that seems pretty common sense, but in that podcast, we talked about how with a client who had experienced lower back pain, never really could squat well, thought squats just weren't made for their body type. And here they had limited range of motion in their ankles. So as we were able to work on the musculature of their calf through massage therapy and ART style stuff, we were able to open up the range of motion in their ankles. They were able to automatically get into a little bit better position with squatting. And as we continue to develop that, they'll find that there's nothing wrong with their body in terms of squatting. Squatting is not it's not like they're not made to squat. Their ankles and calf health were just not healthy enough to squat. So once we fix that issue, they'll get rid of back pain, knee pain, they'll get better development in their lower quads, better development in their lower glutes, because they won't be overusing their lower back and their upper glutes. So there's a lot of effects that can happen with somebody that maybe they're unaware of. So if every time you bench press your shoulders or elbows hurt, that doesn't have to happen. That's not necessary. Okay. So learning to identify what maybe in terms of, like, maybe their shoulder, internal, external rotation issues you have. Maybe you have thoracic mobility issues. So there are things that you can do, that you can change to help you get out of pain associated with movements and to get better development. So if you're like, I can never grow my triceps, or I can never grow my upper chest, or, whatever it is. There are limitations that may exist that you're unaware of that are holding you back, that once you address those limitations, the, world of what you can achieve is endless. So listening to podcast 439 will help explain more about that, give more examples, and give you an idea of what you can do for yourself. Now, today's podcast is building off of that, because we had a question from podcast 439, and the question was, how do I know if my movement is limited? And in general, proper positioning for exercises should be pain-free and feel stable. That's going to be the broad answer. Now, there are individual differences. There's a whole bunch of individual nuances to that, which is why we do, therapy sessions and paid sessions to give people individual attention and do therapies to help their individual issues. So that answer can sound really broad, but how the hell else are you supposed to answer, somebody you have no clue, no information on? So if their movement is limited, if they think that there might be an issue with their movement, they would know that possibly because they either can't get into the proper position for the exercise of their goal, or when they are in the proper position, it feels painful, or when they're in the proper position, there's no pain, but there's also no strength. They just feel really unstable, and it's not a confident position for them. So those are some examples of things that can help us raise awareness and maybe indicate that we should look into movement issues in terms of joints, muscles, health, that kind of stuff. So some examples. I've had clients in the past that they could hold a plank for like 5 minutes or more, even 10 minutes. But they have freaking horrible thoracic back posture because they're like dumped forward in their plank position. And they have absolutely no core stability once you put them in a loaded position. So I've known people that can hold a 10-minute plank, but they can't deadlift 95 pounds without having their upper back hunch over like a question mark. And this is not a knock on them. It's just to show that because they're excellent in one area doesn't mean that it transfers to what they may think it does. So a lot of times people will do planks thinking it's going to give them a strong core when not even remotely close. It may give you core awareness, but holy shit, it doesn't do anything for core strength. So I actually think planks are a complete waste of time. The only plank I believe in is what's called an activated plank, where you actively try to drive your elbows through the floor down to your toes. So you'll see people put like weights in their upper back. That's stupid. They'll just hang out in planks for like extended periods of time. That's stupid. None of that stuff is going to result in what they think it will result in. So if you were to find out that rounding over in a deadlift or a squat, for example, in your thoracic spine, your mid back, was a weakness of yours, you can then do an 8-week program of planks, and that ain't going to do shit. So you might get the smallest of results, okay? And those might be just related to the fact that you're also practicing deadlifts while you're doing the planks. Has nothing to do with the damn planks. So, whereas if you do positional holds, like isometric holds in various positions, you do thoracic back musculature exercises such as seated cable rows, chest supported rows, dumbbell rows, things that target the musculature of that area. That's going to help you way the hell more than some dumbass bodyweight plank for 10 minutes would. So I've seen this happen a bajillions of times. So another example is we have clients who could squat to parallel, but at parallel under their own body weight. They can't hold their knees out and maintain a flat, stabilized upper back. So now they can hold a bodyweight squat, for years. Maybe that's, the goal of their flexibility was to get into that position. But they have absolutely no freaking strength in that position. So I've had a client before where she could hold a bodyweight squat for a while, gave her a 10-pound kettlebell, couldn't stabilize it, and almost fell on her butt. Now, again, not a knock on them. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just want to point out that in this podcast, we're going to be talking about the difference between flexibility and strength. And just because you're flexible does not mean you're strong. And sure as shit, if you're strong, it doesn't mean you're flexible. I think we already know that. So there's tons of people who are super strong, but they can't bend over to tie their own shoe. That's kind of more commonsensical, I guess. Whereas I've met a ton of people who think that because they're flexible, they're healthy. And good God, no. Not even remotely close. So just because you're flexible doesn't mean shit towards health. So it just means you can bend and move. Congratulations. But can you bend and move under weight loads? Can you bend and move against the resistance of everyday life? And if they can't, then they are not healthy. So just because you can bend yourself into a pretzel does not mean you're healthy. Okay? So another one we have is people having extreme range of motion. So they're so damn flexible, they almost look like they're double jointed and they can like bend themselves backwards and stuff. But again, they have no strength to hold in the middle of those range of motions. So they always have to go to joint end range to find stability. They can't find stability through musculature strength in the middle of the range of motion. None of these things are good examples of how somebody should be. So they all portray a weakness in regards to somebody being flexible but not strong. And again, the reason why I kind of chose these examples is that's because the stigma people are going to have is just because I'm flexible and healthy, or just because you're not flexible means you're unhealthy. Bullshit. Not true. Okay? So, with the question of how do I know if my movement is limited? Again, if you can't even get into proper positioning for exercises, obviously you have limited movement. If you can get into the position but it's painful, that's limited movement. And if you can get into the position, no pain, but you have no strength, that is actually a form of limited movement. So just because you can move there doesn't mean it's useful movement. You have to be able to move there and be able to do something there. So we have to have a combination of flexibility and strength. If we don't have those two things, we are not healthy. If we have all of one but none of the other, we are not healthy. So if you're super strong but you're not flexible, you're unhealthy, getting ready for injury. If you're super flexible but no strength, you're still susceptible to injuries for sure, just less susceptible because you're not trying to lift heavy things because you're weak as shit. So the people who are super strong are idiots, and they're going to load like 700 pounds in their back on a squat and say, well, I have to have weight to push me to parallel. Okay, well, have fun when that snaps your knee in half or you tear a muscle. That's not going to go well, okay? You should be able to squat your own fat ass to parallel, whether there's a bar on your back or not. Now, the question is, can you squat to parallel and be able to stay there and have some strength there? That's our goal, okay? So that's what we're usually trying to do when we work with clients, is we're trying to find how much flexibility do we need for their goals. And then once we achieve that degree of flexibility, can we make it strong? So in the last podcast, in number 439, we talked about the need to, when you acquire new range of motion. So when you do flexibility, stretching, movements, muscle therapies, compression therapy, ART, Graston, deep tissue massage, all that stuff that we do on clients. So when we do that with clients, they'll come in, we'll go through all those processes. We establish some new range of motion. Well, I guess not establish. That's actually an incorrect word. We can acquire some new range of motion. We can get into new ranges of motion. But how do we actually establish it? Is by then strengthening them in that new range of motion. So I might have somebody lay on our table. We're going to do some physical therapy style work, do some compression massage, do some ART, opening up of the tissues. Then we're going to go do some loaded squats. Now, I understand that some people are going to freak out when they hear like, oh my God, you did therapies and now all of a sudden you loaded them. Yes, you actually have to load tissues. Okay. Are we going to do in a 1 rep max? No, we're not morons. Okay. So you hear people talk about like, oh, you shouldn't static stretch because it makes you susceptible to a muscle tear. Yeah, if you do a stupid ass static stretch where you crank on the muscle for 3 minutes straight and then you go try a 1 rep max, yes, you're really likely to get injured. But why would you do something so stupid? Let's not negate the entire benefit of static stretches because someone's a moron and doesn't know how to use them. Now, my language is getting aggressive because I get fired up over the stupidity of these things. So just because somebody did something stupid once with something doesn't mean we can't ever all use that thing. Okay, I'm not going to get into, you can extrapolate that into whatever kind of, politics or genres or whatever you want, but I'm going to avoid all of that, okay? So, but static stretching done in proper positions and then properly loaded is 100% a great tool to use to improve overall health. Now, if you take it to extremes and you get hurt, yeah, okay, no shit. Of course. Okay? So we all know that stuff exists when you go to extremes and or you use a therapy without actually knowing how to do so. Of course there's injury risk, okay? So I've gotten dry needling and ART done on my legs, and then within 1 hour got back to the gym and did squatting to help make sure that the dry needling and the tissue type damage that we created, okay, if we did a therapies to break up scar tissue, which heals crisscrossed, by the way, doesn't heal in the lining that it should, the positioning that it should for maximum flexibility. Actually, the body crisscrosses scar tissue to prevent some flexibility, so the fear of that tissue tearing again will be reduced. So if I go in and I get therapies done to break up some of my scar tissue, I actually choose to exercise immediately as fast as I possibly can to make sure the muscles contract and release so they extend, contract, to reinforce the pathway the muscles are used in, okay, the lines of the muscles. So as the body's trying to heal and fix the muscles, it can't heal like one muscle like fiber clumped into the other muscle fiber because I have them sliding and gliding against each other. So there's a ton of detail that I can't get into with these podcasts because it's way too in-depth. But there's a lot of exceptions to the rules that when you understand what the therapy is doing, you can then better understand how to maximize the therapy. So if somebody goes and gets dry needling and ART style stuff done, typically they're going to be told not to exercise. And that's because typically most people don't know what the hell they're doing with exercise and they're just going to hurt themselves. So there's a world of examples of people who get cortisone shots. Okay, like, oh, my knee always hurts. I'm going to get a cortisone shot, and then I'm going to go do a bunch of dumbass activity that wore my knee out in the first place, and then wonder why my knee hurts and I have to get another cortisone shot. Because you're an idiot. That's why. So you get cortisone shots to help the tissue be reduced in inflammation. You can then do therapies on it, move it in healthy building patterns and ways, okay, and methods to over time heal the issue. You don't just get a cortisone shot and then do a bunch of dumb shit that you couldn't do before the cortisone shot. Okay, of course it's not going to work forever. That's not what a cortisone shot is for. So, that's some examples of me just getting mad and rambling at this point. But our goal is, if we ask ourselves the question of how important is flexibility, flexibility is important for you to get into the positions that you need to get into. But with flexibility, you have to pay attention to strengthening the range of motion that you acquire by being flexible. So some examples. I have a client, pretty tall dude, got some pretty tight hips on him. So he can't squat the parallel. So we've addressed some things like ankle mobility by raising his heels, okay? And like Olympic lifting shoes, for example, shoes with a lifted heel. So that will help reduce some need for ankle flexion, which might be limiting him. He also says he feels just kind of tight in his hips. So we do flexibility drills, movement drills, to help loosen up his hips. And we do that at the beginning of every workout. They're not aggressive drills. They're not drills that crank on his connective tissue. They're just drills that kind of open up the musculature of like the glute med, the glute min, piriformis, open up the hamstrings, adductors, things that are related to hip tightness. So he goes in, gets blood flowing through those muscles, gets them open, get them contracting, relaxing, and all of a sudden the range of motion increases. So that improves his flexibility. But then he goes into, say, loaded squats. So we do squats of various types. We do lunges of various types, step-ups. We do other exercises like leg press, hack squat, belt squat, stuff like that, to where once he has that newly opened up range of motion in his hip, we actually then strengthen that area, use that area under weight load, and that helps us establish the newly acquired range of motion as something we can call on more and more frequently so his body won't tighten back up. So if you just pry stuff open, then you go home and sit on your butt, it closes back down. If you open up range of motion, then you use it under a weighted fashion. Your body will be less likely to recoil all the way, and you'll be able to retain more of that newly acquired range of motion as established usable range of motion. And over time, collective workouts or collective therapies, you can establish a full range of motion exactly the way you wanted, and finally actually have some strength in there. So we have another client, female. She can basically sit on the floor when she squats, super ridiculously mobile. However, she's had problems with her freaking bone or femur going out of socket in her hip. She's had a ton of hip pain. She's had a lot of lower back issues. Okay, and it comes down to the fact that she's crazy mobile, but she doesn't have any muscle to hold the bones and stuff in place. So she has maybe a big butt, but she doesn't have muscle in that butt. So we have to work on the glute max, glute min. We have to work on, like I said, adductors, piriformis. There's a whole bunch of all small, crazy muscles around the hips. So, but we have to work on the muscles that are going to hold the femoral head in place, that are going to give her the ability to stop when she's at parallel. There's no need for her to sit on the floor when she squats. So when we trained for a powerlifting meet, she would squat like ass to grass, as they say, and a lot of Olympic lifters and CrossFitters will know what I mean by this, is they just drop until the connective tissue of their knee and hamstrings stops them. Holy shit, is that dangerous, okay, when you're truly going to maximize your strength. So instead of relying on connective tissue being bottomed out, we wanted to strengthen the musculature and have her be able to hold herself at parallel, which was required for a powerlifting meet. Be able to hold herself at parallel with muscular tension. That way we didn't wear out her connective tissues, and she didn't have the hip displacement and kind of back pains and any of that stuff. So we did positional isometrics, which would be a fancy word for paused squats. So paused squats is an example of squatting to parallel, and then you just stop. And your body has to deal with holding yourself plus whatever weight you maybe have on a barbell on your back. And your body has to adapt to find muscular strength to hold that position. So we would do positional isometrics of various exercises, and we would strengthen her in shortened range of motion exercises. So motions that we purposefully shortened because we wanted to develop strength in the middle of these range of motions rather than having her just drop off to the end of the range of motions, relying on joint end range of motion. So we did partial variations of RDLs. We did partial variations of stiff leg deadlifts, squats, regular deadlifts, all that kind of stuff. So typically you hear people talking about trying to do exercises to full range of motions. That's negative. That's a bad thing sometimes. Sometimes you have to put some artificial end caps at the ends of the range of motion, strengthen people within those end caps, and that's going to help them prevent wear and tear on their joints. That's going to actually help joint health because now they have musculature to hold the tension rather than their joints. So there's tons of benefit in that. We have another person, they working through a lot of muscular injuries in their legs. And what we do is we do extremely slow eccentrics. So they might do a squat or a deadlift where they have to lower and stretch the musculature under weight load. It might be 10, 20, 30-second eccentrics. But what that does is it makes sure that at all positions of that range of motion, every little freaking centimeter of difference, that the muscles that are typically compensating can do their thing, but the muscles who typically hide have to be called upon to hold that position. So you'll often see that somebody's strong at kind of ends of range of motion, but they kind of drop or fall through or explode through or kind of blitz through the middle of these range of motions. So by doing slow eccentrics, we're forcing the muscular tissue to extend and contract rather than just a positional asymmetric. That's going to help break up some old scar tissue. That's going to help find the nitty-gritty small areas of the muscle that are maybe underdeveloped that can then eventually lead into or lend into overall strength of the musculature. So by doing slow eccentrics, and then we also do high volume, low weight loads. So for example, in their last squat workout, we did 10 sets of 3 reps between 70 to 80% of their max. Now, for this person, 10 sets of 3 is a high volume. They're typically coming back from their injuries and stuff. Like their typical workout might have been 2 or 3 sets of 3. All of a sudden, we're doing 10 freaking sets of 3. So their last leg workout I went through and counted before the podcast had included 81 repetitions of barbell squats. So what that's doing is we're getting those tissues again to stretch and contract under load, but being mindful of all positions. So that way none of the fibers can hide, none of the fibers can take over. So these are some quick examples. Okay, the guy who couldn't get to parallel, so we got to do hip flexibility and then strengthen that with exercises afterwards. The girl who could sit on the floor in a squat but was having a lot of hip and joint issues, we had to do positional asymmetrics and then strengthen with short and range of motion exercises. And then the person with the old leg injuries, we had to do slow eccentrics and a lot of high volume under medium weight loads. So all of this stuff is examples of, number one, how important is flexibility. It's only important to the degree you need it. And you only want to have flexibility that you can actually use. So you have to strengthen flexibility. So that's what you need. That's how important flexibility is number one, you have to be flexible enough to get into the positions of your goals. So whatever your goals require. So if your everyday standard of life, you should be able to step up, a flight of stairs. You should be able to sit into a chair. You should be able to bend over and pick up a box off the ground. You should be able to reach overhead and put a box on a shelf. Those are the flexibility range of motions that you need to acquire. Okay? You need to open yourself up to get into those positions. Then you need to strengthen those positions. So if somebody's doing Olympic lifting, they have to get themselves down to get to the bar on the floor to correctly do snatches and clean and presses and jerks and whatever the hell else they do. So jerks is an overhead movement, but that would include shoulder positioning as well. So can they actually have their arms locked out overhead where the weight load actually sets into their joints, which is corrective for that type of movement. But whatever your sport is, can you get into the positions necessary for it or whatever your goal is? So that's what determines your flexibility need is what ranges of motion do I need to call upon and be able to be strong in? So do I need to be able to wrap myself up like a pretzel? Probably not, okay? So you just need to find the ranges of motion that you're going to need for your activity or your goal or sport or whatever. Once you have those established, that you can actually get into them, you need to strengthen them. So you need to have both parts. You need to work on flexibility and then strengthening the newly acquired flexibility so then it can become an established range of motion that you can use. That is the goal. Okay? So hopefully that helped give some examples, some ideas, and give more clarity on the concept of flexibility. So if you believe you have limited motion, how much motion is necessary? Can you get into proper positioning for the exercises without pain? Can you get into proper positioning for the exercises at all? And can you get into proper positioning for the exercises while actually being strong in that position? That's what you're looking to do. Okay? So if you have any questions with any of this, or if there's anything you think you need help on or clarity on, always email us, like the person who emailed us after the last training podcast. Okay? So thank you for that. Thank you for the interaction. Thank you for the people who are the patrons to the podcast and help pay for this thing. So I appreciate you guys too. I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate when people participate. So thank you very much. Very, very, very much. Sincerely, thank you to everybody who gets involved in this. I really appreciate it. And I hope it helps. Okay? So email us if you need anything ever. Our email is brutalironGym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. Also, if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. The podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. You can tell us at our email at brutalironGym@gmail.com. Cool. As always, I hope this was helpful. And thank you for listening. And thank you for watching.